Okay, so I'm William McKee. I'm an associate consultant with Taylor Clarke. I'm here with Alistair Brown. Alistair, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, like William, I'm an associate with Taylor Clarke, a company I've worked with for over 20 years. So I've been there a little longer than William, but it's my second home.
I think it's fair to say that Alistair is the kind of a resident culture expert. Um, we've been running a series of events around culture recently, and I thought it might be really interesting to just kind of get a hold of Alistair for 10 minutes and kind of pick your brain a little bit on culture.
Great. I'll find it very difficult to restrict myself to 10 minutes talking about culture, but delightful. A really interesting time in the field of culture with so much going on that affects your culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're really starting to see, what cultures really are when they're tested. But one of the things that has been coming out of these events around culture, certainly that's really struck me, is this thing of if you want to address the culture, let's not use the word culture, or don't mention the culture. What do you think about that? How's that struck you?
Yeah, I think it really ties in with my experience of challenges of talking about culture, particularly with senior teams. They often don't like the word culture, or they have very broad definitions of what it is. So one of the Ed Shine, who's one of the leading experts in this field, says, stop talking about culture, talk about performance, talk about behavior, talk about habits,
Mm-hmm.
talk about rituals and routines and how they impact performance. And at some point, once people have an understanding of how they all knit together, that's what forms the culture. Then you can talk about culture. But joking aside, that's probably one of the biggest challenges of working with culture is getting a senior team who need to own it to be able to talk about it in a clear, consistent, coherent way. I mean, even on senior teams, even strategy sometimes is defined slightly differently. Multiply that by 10 when it comes to, can we agree a definition on culture? And at that point, I will often say, let's park that, let's talk about some other stuff. And then at some point in the conversation, it comes back to say, well, we can collectively collect that under a banner of culture, because one of my strong beliefs in the work I do is that you don't do culture change. You get culture change at the end of a series of activities and processes that change the organization and change the culture. And I think that sometimes it's people don't want to look, ill-informed when they're talking about it. So take it off the table.
It can be like the emperor's new clothes, isn't it? Of course, I understand what you mean by culture, and of course, I understand the things that affect culture.
Well, I was somebody, a couple of days ago who's recently, he's not in this organization anymore, but they're a major retailer, one of the top 10 retailers in the UK, who have a reputation for having a distinct culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I was intrigued to ask him about how that happened. And he said, really good question that I struggled to answer. I've been there for 30 years. I've been responsible for culture change programs, but it evolves, and it's really about a series of long-term objectives. Often in the strategy documents, all the strategy stuff, the programs, the processes, the projects are all neatly collected together, and they're inside a big circle that says culture. And then when you ask, where's the culture plan? It's kind of not there as a culture plan. So in some ways, talking about culture and the culture plan, can get in the way.
So I mean that just brings to mind that kind of time-honored phrase now of culture eats strategy for breakfast. That gets knocked around all the time. One of the things that you've mentioned to me, in the past kind of thing, is this idea of culture and strategy at the same time. Working on both.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I reflect on my own career, which was partly as a senior manager in sales and marketing positions, partly as a general manager, and then laterally as a consultant, culture was either not discussed or it was discussed at the end after the strategy was agreed. So it was firmly, what's our strategy? And then it would be does that give us any challenges with regard to culture?
Mm.
My experience, my belief is they need to be one conversation. I kind of see culture as the environment your strategy lives in,
Right.
and that
Right.
your strategy will thrive or not be implemented to the extent it's accepted by the culture. It's a bit like, major organ transplants. You put a new heart in, a new liver, and the body rejects it sometimes. I think sometimes companies put strategies in and the body rejects it.
Mm-hmm.
So think about when you're, I always recommend when you're talking about strategy, think about how easy it will be to implement it given your current culture, and actually even go as far as to say, well, if you think of manufacturing a product, you design a product to be easy to manufacture. I think you should design a strategy to be easy to implement, and that's about to what extent does it fit our culture, and even make that iterative and say, I think we're going too far too quickly with our strategy and that culture. We need to balance things and align the strategy and the culture and move them together. I mean, frequently organizations go through cycles of performance, and the three areas under challenge are, is it the strategy, is it the leadership team, is it the culture? And often they'll change the strategy, change the leadership team, try something else, and lo and behold, it fails again because of a failure to recognize that the culture has become disconnected over a period of time.
I mean, that would
So
be a pretty...
it needs to be at the top table with strategy being discussed. Is the most effective way I found.
So with rather than as an afterthought, as you say, like let's chuck the strategy into this environment and hope that it floats, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And getting away from that. So I mean, that would be on some level quite a brave thing for someone at the top table to say. Actually, I think we're gonna, I think the strategy is moving too quickly, or we should alter the strategy in this way to take account of the culture, so that we have some success and we can build on that. You're almost like, you were never going to make that amazing progress with the new strategy because it was going to fail, but to actually start to argue against that on the basis of culture. What have you found in your team?
I think one of the reasons, building on that point, I think one of the reasons now is a good time, a good jumping off point for working with culture is, people are making radical changes to their strategy. Life will never be the same again. Customers, supply chains, attitudes, society, so it's all turbulent. So that's leading companies to be a lot more kind of searching and put a lot more scrutiny under scenario planning and other options. Mm-hmm. So why, if you come up with a completely different strategy and launch it into the same culture, will it be well received in a culture that grew up with a strategy over the last 5 years that was quite different? Mm. So it's kind of really, and it does require a bit of a belief shift. Let me ask you a question. Which of the, you're the MD of a £50 million company 10 years from now, which do you think is your easiest job? Is it to develop a strategy for that company or to change its culture?
Mm. Yeah, I know which one I'd rather sit down and do. I think that's the rub, isn't it? It's easy to kind of.
So time invested in helping a senior team understand the relationship between strategy and culture and how they can, shape a winning strategy by putting a lot of rigor into understanding what the culture is and what it might need to shift to be successful. I mean, at the moment, everybody's talking about we need to be more agile. We need to be more resilient. Change is accelerating. We need to release the potential in our workforce. We need to really focus on engagement, or we need to be more compassionate in our approach. And all of these things are, cultural shifts. Innovation is another one. So an innovation strategy is in many ways is grounded in culture, but it involves process and other pieces as well. Mm-hmm. So it's so strong, such a strongly held belief of mine. I would feel uncomfortable talking about strategy without thinking about culture. And there's a lovely story. I can't remember where it comes from. I think it was a senior executive of a big American company. Somebody once asked him if he was on a train with the company's latest 5-year plan and he left it on the train by mistake, and one of his competitors got on the train afterwards and picked up the strategy document. They asked him, how big a problem would that be? And his answer was, probably not as big a problem as you think, because I'm not sure that's what people do and if they actually follow the strategy. And that to me talks a bit to culture.
Uh-huh.
So yeah.
I think the question is just spinning around in my mind there, because I think there's an element of the senior team. You can externalize strategy. You can intellectualize it. It's an activity we can do. We can come up with a good one. I'm just thinking about, if the senior team, there's the degree to which the culture is set from the top and the degree to which culture, can change from the bottom up. But, if you're saying we want a more innovative culture, the senior team are going to have to ask themselves around things like their attitude to mistakes, their attitudes towards uncertainty. That requires a much sort of deeper level of introspection and commitment to change than just sort of strategizing in a way. Does that?
Yeah, I think one of the things a lot of senior teams are grappling with right now is being comfortable with disagreement and moving forward quickly. They've had to make so many decisions and calls that they don't all agree with, but we need to do something, and they're moving forward. So being comfortable with difference, and comfortable with letting go, because I think of all the things that I'm seeing at the moment, I think agility is becoming, people talked a lot about authentic leadership a few years ago. Now it's all about agile leadership and agile organizations that came out of the IT world. And that for me is impossible without a strong focus on culture.
Okay. Do you know what? That's been a swift 10 minutes, and I think I'd love to interview you for like an hour, but I just don't know if the LinkedIn algorithm would reward us for that if we post this here.
We have a second date. We'll have a second date, William.
Yes, I mean, I think if we're going to do this, exactly. Thank you. If we were, I'll get the check that time. If we were going to do this again, just thinking about the conversation we just had, if we're going to do this again, what could we get into? What would you want to dive into there?
I think if we assume that people have got a bit comfortable around how to define culture and a really meaningful conversation around what their current culture is, then I think a useful conversation is where do we start? How do we build this into our priorities and our direction of travel? What's required to get going, and maybe combine that by looking at bottom up, top down. Does a strategy that involves a cultural shift? Does that need to be more bottom up, more top down? Can you drive it top down? And some interesting challenges there. I mean, culture is a largely there's a lot of different views on it out there, and the top down, bottom up one is still a raging debate at the moment. So
something about the practical application then, the practical steps that people can take, and that kind of view of where does it need to come from, or what are the different responsibilities in different places.
Yeah, I'm convinced this is important, and I understand it, and intuitively we need to get behind this, but how do we get going? And it's interesting, there are a lot of senior people will confess to, I understand culture is really important, and I intuitively know we need to do something about it, but often they're drawn into, well, let's have a strategy fix or a capability fix before we go to culture. So that might be that would be interesting to talk about, I think.
Okay, well let's do that. I mean, thank you for this time, and let's.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Cheers, Alistair.
Cheers.